Finding growth factor from a graph. What is growth factor? For a graph, growth factor is the multiplicative pattern from one point to the next. For this example, notice that each point is twice as tall as what it was before. So to get from one point to the next, I need to multiply times 2. From 1 to 2, it's times 2, and from 2 to 4, it's times 2. So this graph has a growth factor of times 2. Problem 1. What's the growth factor for this graph? Taking a look at our points, how do I go from a height of 3 to a height of 12? That's going to be a jump of times 4. Does this pattern work for the next point? How do I go from a height of 12 to a height of 48? That's also going to be a jump of times 4. Since I'm repeatedly multiplying by times 4 to get from one point to the next, this has a growth factor of 4. Problem 2. What's the growth factor for this graph? Notice that for this graph, the height is decreasing. As I move forward along x, each y value is getting smaller and smaller. So I know that the growth factor has to be a decimal or a fraction. How can I go from a height of 24 to a height of 6? That could be multiplying by 1/4. And how can I go from a height of 6 to a height of 1.5? That can be also multiplying by 1/4. Notice that each point is a fourth of the height as what it was previously. So this has a growth factor of 1/4. Problem 3. What's the growth factor for this graph? Notice for this graph, we don't have any consecutive points. Here we're starting with x equals 0, and our next point is when x equals 4. How many jumps does it take to go from the 0th step to the 4th step? It takes 1, 2, 3, 4 jumps to go from the 0th step to the 4th step. So I can answer the following question starting at 1, and if I multiply 4 jumps, 1, 2, 3, 4, I should land at 16. So what growth factor can I use so that when I multiply it 4 times, I'll land at 16? The answer to this one is going to be times 2. If I repeatedly multiply by times 2, I will land at 16. 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 2 is 16. So my growth factor is going to be times 2. It takes 4 jumps of times 2 to go from 1 to 16. Problem 4. What's the growth factor for this graph? Notice that for this graph, we don't have any consecutive points. And as I move forward, the points are decreasing. The height of the point is getting smaller as we move forward. So starting from the 0th step to the 3rd step, how many jumps does it take to go from x equals 0 to x equals 3? It takes 1, 2, 3 jumps to get to the 3rd step. So I can answer the following question starting at height 40. If I take 3 jumps, 1, 2, 3, I should land at height 5. So what should be my multiplicative pattern? What can I multiply repeatedly 3 times? That will bring me down to 5. I see that the answer to this is going to be times 1/2. Starting at 40, multiplying by a half, now I'm at 20, times another half, I'm down to 10, and multiply by a half, I'm down to 5. So I'm repeatedly multiplying by a half each time to go from 40 to 5. So our growth factor is 1/2. To summarize, when finding the growth factor from a graph, we need to figure out how many jumps it takes to go from one point to the next. That's going to tell us how many times we're repeatedly multiplying. From there, we can solve the equation and figure out what our growth factor is.